Washtenaw County occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ottawa, the Ojibwa, and the Potawatomi. The Washtenaw County Democratic Party recognizes historic Indigenous communities in Michigan and those who are forcibly removed from their homelands. Washtenaw County occupies lands ceded in the 1807 Treaty of Detroit. We further recognize the ongoing relationship of dependence upon and respect for all living things, all living beings of the earth, sky, and water. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences. With that, I'm going to turn it over now to Kathleen Murphy, who has put together a tremendous program for us. Thanks again to Debbie Dingle and to Jason Morgan for updating us. And Debbie, once again, we're super glad to have you back in the saddle. And I know you're not at full steam, but it sure seems like it from our perspective. So with that, Kathleen, it's all yours.
Today in the US and around the world, people are awakening to the urgency of addressing the climate crisis and environmental racism. We have just heard our Representative Debbie Dingle, who we are happy to see is on the mend, and Jason Morgan include remarks about the climate crisis and environmental racism in their comments. We thank them. For our panel, we've invited other Democratic officials, city climate organizations, and activist grassroots organizations that are, each in their own way, fighting back against the growing climate emergency and the dire consequences of environmental racism, which exists mainly in those communities of the poor and of people of color who have endured the worst of environmental pollution in its many forms, and in turn have had their health compromised, and as has become especially clear during the pandemic. At the WCDP meeting in April on voter turnout, Michigan House Representative Yousef Rabhi, who will be speaking soon today too, admonished us to make clear as a party what specific issues we stand for to attract voters and increase voter turnout. So we examine the words and ideas shared with us today to help us understand the enormity of the challenges we face and to help us shape the policies related to the climate crisis and environmental justice that we support in the future. Each of the speakers has up to 8 minutes to share their ideas and actions with us. Then we will open it up to questions from me and from those of you out there in Zoom land. So now I introduce to you Michelle Dietrich. Michelle?
Good morning. Heartfelt thanks to Chris Savage and to our Congresswoman Debbie Dingle and to Kathleen, thank you, and all the organizers. And big thanks to Debbie for her really crucial work on Thrive Act and on PFAS. And as the happy owner of a Chevy Volt, which is unhappily no longer made, I'd love your work to ensure that the new electric vehicles are affordable and made in the US. And also big gratitude to all my fellow panelists who are all climate champions whose work I follow and admire. And for everyone giving up your beautiful morning to be here to talk about this really important topic. I do have PowerPoints, and so I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, as the slide says, I'm Michelle Dietrich, the elected chair of the newest DNC Council, created less than 2 years ago, Council on Environment and Climate Crisis. I'm a former county commissioner and so glad of the work that Commissioner Morgan and others are leading toward carbon neutrality at the county. In fact, Washtenaw County is way out ahead of most municipalities. I live in Superior Township on Anishinaabe land, in a part of our county where there are still vestiges of oil drilling equipment from the 30s. Many here in Washtenaw County got a wake-up call about the connection between the climate crisis and environmental racism as we fought 3 major fossil fuel infrastructure project installations in the county in 2015 to 2019. All of them high pressure, large capacity pipelines that slice through our farmland, that tunnel under our rivers and creeks and lakes, going so close to homes and at least one school that they are put in what's called the blast zone. And these communities most affected by these pipelines are disproportionately Black and Brown in this, as Commissioner Morgan rightly noted, very racially segregated county. And this parallels what is true at a national level as well, where we see that fossil fuel infrastructure disproportionately affects and harms communities of color and communities with lower incomes much more than others. So our government at all levels and our nation has a lot of work to do in environmental justice. And so, in fact, do many parts of the environmental movement, which has its own history of white supremacy. It is not enough with environmental justice and addressing environmental racism to ensure current equity, current fairness. We need to redress the systemic environmental racism infused throughout our policies and history and its legacy of cumulative harm. So a little history here. In 1982, Dr. Benjamin Chavez was the leader of a protest against a plan to dump tons of PCB contaminated soil into a poor Black community's landfill in North Carolina. Local police stopped and jailed him for driving too slow, and of course for driving while Black and for daring to lead a protest. So when the cell door slammed shut on Dr. Chavez, he gripped the metal bars and said, "This is environmental racism," and thus the term was coined 40 years ago. He was naming something, though, that goes back to the arrival of the first European colonizers and enslavers, something that has shaped our built environment, our food system, and the extraction and generation of materials. Environmental racism also impacts where major sources of pollution for manufacturing and energy production are located. We see that here in Michigan. Fossil fuel activity on ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples, line 5, redlining, housing discrimination, government program and regulatory inequities created a system in which heavy polluting industry was permitted, even encouraged, to cluster in communities of color. Every part of the oil, coal, and gas life cycle generates toxic air and water pollution and greenhouse gases that fuel the climate crisis, causing 350,000 plus deaths every year in the US, disproportionately Black, Brown, and poor people. And being in a rural area isn't protection. Tribal lands are contaminated by mining. Women in fracking areas give birth prematurely. People living near CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, with their huge open air pits of animal waste that release noxious gases, die at the rate of 13,000 per year. So how do we get off this dangerous road we are on, and who's responsible? So protests like this one on the slide that I know some of you were present for, or the one happening right now in Minnesota against Line 3, led by Indigenous climate activists, are crucial to ending the fossil fuel addiction. Your activism matters. Line 5 is just one of the many pipelines that enabled the US to be the world's largest producer of oil and gas, a distinction I hope we lose quickly. We are responsible for much more than our fair share of fossil fuel consumption as well. The countries least responsible for causing climate change are suffering the greatest harms, and those countries are disproportionately located in the global South. This is environmental racism at a global scale. So we need to do our fair share, and that means a managed transition out of fossil fuel production, which is largely a federal issue to address. So under Trump, the environment suffered terribly, terrible tariffs, the worsening climate emergency, his rollbacks on nearly 100 key environmental rules and legislation. We have to undo that, but it's not enough. A report came out 2 weeks ago from the IEA, the International Energy Agency, which is the world's leading energy body and not precisely an activist organization. They said we need to stop globally any new fossil fuel extraction or exploration, which left a lot of jaws hanging open in surprise, but also shows just how urgent the situation is. There are models showing that we're not only going to blast through 2 degrees, we're at 1.2 degrees of warming now compared to historic levels, but head up to 3, 4. I don't even want to talk about the worst case models. President Biden ran as a climate champion. It was a cornerstone of his campaign, and he kicked off his term strong on climate, using executive actions and provisions of the American Rescue Plan to get a lot done fast. Established a White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, substantial debt relief to Black farmers, and more. And I am so grateful that we have people throughout the Biden administration, from the top to the bottom, who understand the importance of environmental justice and who prioritize it. What the Biden administration is proposing in infrastructure and green new jobs and sustainability is one of the most substantial restructurings of our economy in generations. And he reiterated a lot of that in his budget proposal at the end of last week. And to be clear, the Biden plan won't be enough, but it is a huge, crucial, historic first step. And the battle is going on right now in Congress over his proposals, with Republicans trying to strip out every environmental provision of the bills. We need Congress to act, and to act quickly. So that's why the council is actively building out our organization across the country, trying to help spur the needed urgency in Washington and around the country for bold action and outreach to climate and environmental activists. I'm proud that we put environmental justice groups at the forefront. For too long, solutions to the urgent environmental and climate issues that we face have left out the people most impacted. So we're promoting a just transition policy and a policy framework with seats dedicated to Indigenous, Black, Latinx, youth, Asian American youth, and with diverse representation geographically and from labor on our executive board.
Thank you, Michelle. I think we'll have to go on now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
One more sentence for you.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead. Sorry about that. To asking you all to help us. Hold on. We've got, you can sign up to help the council at dncclimate.org/updates and hear about our events, our calls to action. Sign up to share with us your climate story that we'll promote on social media, and to help us in our crucial fight right now to ensure that fossil fuel subsidies, as President Biden wants, are ended, saving $15 billion a year in direct fossil fuel subsidies in this country. We should not be funding that. I know it's difficult politically, but we have a petition for End Polluter Welfare Act to support it, and other measures. You find it all at our website, dncclimate.org. And I just have a closing slide showing some of the great climate activism of Michiganders. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. That was terrific. So now we'll turn to Yousef Rabhi, Representative Rabhi. You're next.
Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you to Michelle for that wonderful presentation. It's an honor to follow you and to be on the call with you and all the other panelists and all of my friends at the WCDP. I'm honored to be part of this discussion this morning. So I want to build on some of the things that Michelle was talking about and maybe go into a little bit more detail as well. But I want to start by talking about colonialism because I feel that it is a responsibility of ours to understand our history. And I think Michelle was right to start that conversation in her slideshow. But I want to go into a little bit more depth there and acknowledge and make sure that we understand that the colonization and exploitation of Black communities, of brown communities, of people in the global South is not new. It is something that has been going on for hundreds of years. And when you consider that what once was occurring was essentially governments marching into Africa and South America and Asia and taking over countries and removing the indigenous populations and removing their leadership and creating their own colonial governments, what we often don't remember and understand is that they were doing those things so that their corporations that were housed in those European countries could come in and exploit the resources of those countries. What we often see is the protests where where people are trying to rise up against the colonial powers, or revolutionary movements that are trying to rise up against the colonial powers. What we often don't see is the images of environmental destruction and degradation that have been left behind by the European companies that have come to countries like, in Africa, in Vietnam, in Asia and South America, and the environmental degradation that they left behind. But the other thing that we need to remember is that, again, even with things like slavery, we think of slavery as something that was perpetrated by the, a government or another entity, but it was, again, corporate interests that did that. Corporate interests were moving us in the from Africa to plantations. It was corporate doing that to help farm for sugar and farm for cotton. It was for profit. It was for our capitalist system that slaves were exploited. So capitalism, colonialism, slavery are all interconnected. And they are all interconnected to environmental justice, because at the end of the day, injustice is to me less, frankly, about the environment and more about our economy and who runs the economy and who controls our systems, and for who and for what. And so when we think about the modern context, colonialism is not dead. Colonialism is very much alive. It has just taken a different context. It is no longer that France can, as a country, run another country. There have been revolutions fought to emancipate people in order for that no longer to happen. But unfortunately, that emancipation came at a cost, which was economic, and countries and communities within countries have been forced to then depend on those same corporations that were exploiting them historically under colonialism and are now exploiting them economically under neocolonialism. That new colonialism that we live under today exists with those corporations. If you look at Nigeria and the oil that is being exploited by European and American companies, where people are dying prematurely, where the infant mortality rates are high, where the water is contaminated, where people cannot breathe, they cannot drink the water because of those corporations that have come in and exploited and taken and continue to with impunity, and to leave behind a disaster environmentally. Those local indigenous populations do not control their own resources. They're not allowed to, because it is these corporations that have come in, that have planted their flag, that have colonized their resources, that have colonized their wealth. And that is today our reality. It is our reality in Detroit, in Benton Harbor, in Flint. It's our reality in Mexico. It's our reality in South America, Africa, Asia, all the same places that the traditional colonialism that we know in our history books occurred. But we understand history in order to understand our present. And in the context of this, we often talk about the oil and gas industry. We talk about pipelines. We talk about fracking. We talk about the oil extraction that occurs across the globe. But make no mistake that, and the reason I said earlier that this isn't really about the environment to me, it's about how our economy functions, is because if you think about, I drive a fully electric battery vehicle, a Bolt. I'm proud to be of a Bolt that does not emit any gasoline. And as we move towards an economy where we're hearing Volvo and Ford and all these companies are announcing battery cars, that's great. But where does the battery come from? Those are resources that come from somewhere. And what is turning out to be the reality is that those resources are coming from those colonized third world countries. Well, we call them third world countries. They're not third world countries. They are countries that were forced out of their resources. They have more wealth and more power than they even know, but they have been stolen. Those resources have been stolen from them over time. And they have been forced into destitution by the colonialism, by the colonist powers, by their corporate power they've put in those positions. And that's why they struggle economically. It's not for lack of resources. It's not because they're not intelligent people. It's because their resources have been stolen from them by Europe and the United States of America. And when we look at batteries, we look at the resources that go into batteries. Those resources come from places like Bolivia. In Bolivia, when a government that was trying to put the people in charge of their own resources so that the people of that country would benefit from those resources were overthrown by the United States of America and other European and American powers in a coup d'etat. And why did they take that coup d'etat? I think it had a lot to do with the fact that manufacturing is increasing and those resources come from places like Bolivia. So watch that, because that's real and that's happening today. And thankfully that government will actually are back in power, and they're putting the power back in the hands of the people so that the people can control their own resources. It's the same thing in Flint. What happened when the community had their ability to control their own future? When the community was colonized, when they were taken away from the tables of decision making, their water was poisoned. So really, this isn't about, to me, this isn't about the environment. This is about how do we put communities of color, Indigenous communities, Black communities, back in charge of their own future, back in charge of their own wealth, back in charge of their own resources. Because that's how we turn back the clock on environmental degradation and destruction. That's how we turn back the clock on environmental racism. And we can go back to a time when Indigenous communities, Black communities had power and resources and wealth to be able to build their own future, to build their own destiny. And we have removed the shackles of colonialism and imperialism and slavery where we need to be looking. Let's think about this in the historical context. Let's think about this in the context of that colonization that has occurred. There is a justice that needs to happen. Reparations are environmental justice. Affirmative action is environmental justice. And that's the deep reality that we face. I'm actually working on a piece of legislation to reverse our state of Michigan's constitutional position on affirmative action, because we need to reinstate affirmative action in the state of Michigan. It's unacceptable that we undid that back in 2006. We need to bring affirmative action back. That's how we create environmental justice. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Yousef. Very interesting. Okay, now following on that, and he introduced it a little bit already, is Nayyirah Shariff, director of Flint Rising. So Nayyirah, it's all yours.
Hey, Shaw. I was like, I had raised my hand, but I was trying to do the clap emoji and I didn't realize that was like not there. But yeah, so peace. I'm Nayyirah Shariff, and hello and happy reparations June. I'm so excited for Juneteenth in a couple of weeks. I am the director of Flint Rising, and I'm based in Flint, Michigan. So I'm gonna start off with a little story. So my parents, like as a young family, they purchased this home, and it was like their first home. Like it was like less than 10 years old, and they did not know that the home, the playground that they were super excited to, have their children play at used to be a dumping ground for DuPont. And 2 minutes away, there was a wood waste burning plant, and sold their energy to consumers' power. So I actually was born with asthma, and I didn't realize that one of the reasons that I was probably born in asthma is because like where I live. So one of the things that people may not know is like the most important number attached to your name is not your social security number. It's not your credit score, it's your zip code, because that's going to determine your life expectancy, what sort of toxins that you're going to be exposed to, what industries that are placed next to your neighborhood through zoning. And all of that is kind of, because of environmental racism. Now, most people know about Flint through the water crisis. And yes, that is probably one of the most well-known of the of instances of environmental racism, but it's definitely not the first instance of environmental racism. And I used to work as an issue-based organizer, mostly volunteer. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you all about, like through my work with the Flint water crisis, is I got into this because of the emergency manager law. We were fighting for the restoration of democracy in Flint and across the state. We were part of the petition drive, the fight to get it on the ballot. and then the horrors after 45 days after it was voted down, that the governor and the Michigan legislature basically, passed a virtually identical version of that law. But one of the things that people, when they think of the Flint water crisis, like they just think of like, so there was this woman, this mother, and then there was this civil engineer that kind of came in riding the high horse. And then you had a physician that basically rescued the whole community. And that is extremely false because like what really happened was you had a group of organized individuals who were educating their community, and they had their life experiences, and they knew that they were not going to be gaslighted when they demonstrated and showed like the pictures of like their water and brought their water down to city council. But city council didn't have any power because we were under state receivership. And people were organizing over years, for a year and a half. And if it wasn't for people who organizing, Mark Edwards, who was the civil engineer who came, like he wouldn't have had any sort of credibility. It was the residents who were organizing that used their social capital to convince other residents to get their water collected. And because residents used their social capital, it was a 90% return rate. So there were 300 test samples. It was like 285 returned, which is unheard of, like when you're doing some sort of like this collection. And then you had Dr. Monahana Tisha, who looked at like available information that was already reported. So I don't know if folks know, but like when you are on a social safety net program, if you have a child, it's required for that baby to be tested for blood lead levels because there is an assumption that they're living in a home that had lead paint. And so like she basically analyzed that data, looked at that data and overlaid it over a map that Mark Edwards had collected, because we were very intentional in recruiting residents across the city. So we had a strategy and a plan, and then this was just validating the residents' experience. But after all of that knowledge came out, like nothing changed. Like it had to have like continual organizing, including electing a mayor who said that the first thing that she would do when she was elected was to declare a state of emergency based on the lead contamination in the water. She was elected, and within 1 month of her being elected, she did that, and that really pierced this media blackout and made, Flint kind of like this international thing. And that was just basically the beginning, because like the state like basically continued to abuse residents, and that was really the origins of Flint Rising, because it started with the canvas to the undocumented Spanish speaking community because there were no materials in any language other than English. So we basically did the statewide call, if you know how to speak Spanish, come to Flint, because they didn't even know it was a crisis. And they're beginning to find out because it became international news, and their families are calling from their countries of origin, telling them to not drink the water, that something is wrong with their water. And so like, this is something like when you're thinking about environmental recovery, like you have to make sure that everybody is protected. And eventually, like I'm the water person, I'm doing like all things water, like water affordability, water quality, like helping design some of these federal programs and ensuring that resources actually, get to the community. And I'm pretty sure that there'll be more stuff coming out in the Q&A, because I know I could talk, ad nauseum about like all types of organizing strategies. And before I end, like one of the things that we were instrumental in was changing Michigan's lead and copper rule. And even though it's not perfect, we know that we need this, there is no safe level for lead, and it needs to be at the detect level. because that was one of the other lessons, is like those numbers are all made up. Like they're not like based in public health. People may think that is, there's a difference between safety and compliance, because people connote safety with it being physically safe, that there is a doctor signing off on it, medical physician signing off on it. And it's really like they are compliant with the rules. So, and that's kind of like this difference that, needs to continue to be educated. And I'm gonna close out by thanking Congresswoman Dingo for introducing the Thrive Act, because organizationally we endorsed it, and we're part of a statewide formation called MAGIC, the Michigan Alliance of Justice and Climate. And if you want to hear more about that, I don't know if y'all heard about that yet, but there is an organization in Washtenaw County, the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice, who is on the steering committee for that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nayyirah. That was wonderful. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Missy Stouts. Missy.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. And thank you so much to all the extraordinary speakers. I have a sense that I was invited erroneously. I just want to listen and learn from all of you. So I can't wait to get to Q&A with everyone. I want to start by acknowledging that I am sitting on land, and of course the city of Ann Arbor occupies this land, which is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe. And like almost all of our places, these lands were obtained in pretty unconscionable ways. And of course, knowing that doesn't rectify the situation, but it is an important part of our journey. And I hope we can actually get to a point where we talk about what we do about land ownership. And that's a conversation I'm excited to start having more locally. So just kind of giving a little background perspective, I am really, really fortunate to have a role in the city of Ann Arbor where I get to work on sustainability and equity every day. And that's a pretty rare gift for folks, and actually be compensated for it. But I want to own and acknowledge that kind of from the outset. I also do want to own and acknowledge that I am a white affluent woman doing this work. And so I have a very limited landscape. So what that, I share that for lots of reasons. One is because it means that collaborations are essential. It means that a lot of the time my role is to be behind the scenes and help support others with the mission and the work that they're doing. I just want to acknowledge that and share with you a little bit on the positive side today. I want to share what we can do about this, because I am feeling energized this morning. For those of you in Ann Arbor, you may know this is A20 week. We are celebrating the 1-year anniversary of our community's climate and equity plan. And we're at the farmers market right downtown. If you want to come and say hi to us, we'll be at Common Cycle a little bit later. You can get your bike all fixed up. And then we're heading over to the distillery later today. So hopefully we'll see you around town. What I want to share is we're doing our work on climate and equity, a few really important initiatives that don't actually make really good press releases. So we don't get to talk about them a lot because that's not the point of them. People often hear about our solar program that we're doing. And you're right, we are doing a solar program, and it's wildly successful. If you own a house and you can afford the payment, that's solar system on your roof, right? And let's think about who our banks loan to and who they do not loan to, and who's considered a risky investment and who is not considered a risky investment. So one of the programs that we're working on pretty behind the scenes is a low to moderate income solar initiative. And we've actually won some technical assistance dollars to do this program, which is really looking at how we create our own forces to be able to finance low income solar, so that the wealth generation that actually comes from having your own renewable energy system, something that everyone can access. And so we just got a technical assistance to work on this. We're working with our surrounding communities, especially the city of Ypsilanti and others, to figure out how does this actually work, and how do we kind of change the paradigm. The market will work for some people, but it's not working for a whole lot of other folks in the community. And I'm happy to talk a little bit in the Q&A about what the model is that we're proposing as part of this. It's quite different, but that makes it really exciting. We also have to figure out this wonky term, how we decarbonize our homes. Who really cares about decarbonization? It is not a very attractive word. I don't even know what it means half the time. So what we decided to do was to work with one of our neighborhoods. And that neighborhood happens to be the most diverse neighborhood in Ann Arbor, 50% owner occupied, 50% renter occupied, and they're actually designing a whole home assessment. So we were able to secure some funding, and all of the money is going to that neighborhood for their time, for them to actually do the indoor air quality monitoring and the water monitoring, and to figure out what do they want the aesthetic of the neighborhood to look like collectively. But it's not just that, it's also money to have potlucks and to hang out outside and to do planting in the communal spaces that they have to really kind of foster whatever it is they want their community to be. And we're learning from that. Using the principle of targeted universalism, we're able to really understand what the community wants and what the community needs in an area that's been not traditionally, even currently underinvested in. And if we find solutions collaboratively with them, those solutions are going to work. They're going to work in other places too. And that's really exciting. So this is a grant that just kicked off in April. It's going throughout the whole year, and we're actually working on trying to secure multi-million-dollar investments to make the improvements that the neighbors really identify themselves, so that they get to go all the way through from identifying the kinds of things that they love about their neighborhood that they want to maintain, and then the things that they want to enhance, and then hiring people in the neighborhood to do the work so they can have the jobs development. I'm really excited about that project. We haven't come up with a cheeky name yet for it, so if anyone's really creative, I can totally talk to you after on that one. And then I just wanted to share maybe one more example, which is we're at this phenomenal moment of time. I don't know about you, but 7 months ago, anything coming out of the federal government, 5 months ago, anything coming out of the federal government around climate was terrifying, right? I was nervous about what was going to get revoked, what policy we were going to lose, how much funding we were going to lose for this work. We didn't have a friend in the White House, and that's different. So now it's like a fire hose coming out from DC, which is delightful and such a pivot. Well, we've got the American Rescue Plan, right? So we have dollars that are flowing into our community, and Washtenaw County, just like lots of other places across the state, is getting a lot of money. It is really easy to spend money poorly. It is really easy to spend money poorly, and it is really hard to spend money well. This is a moment in time where we can be better and we can be different, and we can invest in the kind of community that we want to have. And this is a chance for us to tell our state representatives, to tell our county commissioners, to tell our local leaders what we want our community to be and how we want those resources to be allocated. And that really excites me. So part of my job is pushing constantly as we think about how to invest those resources to make sure they're really centering equity and building back. No, I don't like that word. I don't like building back. Building back implies where we were before was good enough, and it's just not good enough for so many people. How are we building better? How are we creating the community that we're going to be proud to leave behind to our kids and our grandkids? So I'm really excited about this moment in time, and this is a chance for all of us to get involved and to really help say what's possible. The last thing I'll just leave you with is something I'm going to say more to myself than to you. It just reminds me when I get really frustrated in this work, I have to tell myself every single policy or law that I'm fighting was written by a human, which means it can be changed by a human. So I hope we can keep fighting, and I'm excited to do that with all of you. So thanks for the chance to be here today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stults. And now we'll turn to Greg Woodring, speaking for Ann Arbor for Public Power. Greg, you're on.
Thank you. I'm going to go over to this slide that I have. And I would also like to just thank all of the fantastic speakers that we've had today. Really just some insightful stuff here. But my name is Greg, and I'm from Ann Arbor for Public Power. Now, we are a community organization of several different local activist orgs. Representation from DSA, Sunrise, Indivisible, Climate Action Movement, Washtenaw 350, Ann Arbor Beyond Bernie, and more. And we believe in a green and publicly owned energy future. And our goal is to democratize, decommodify, decarbonize, and decolonize our energy sources. And we didn't just add that decolonize for the sake of this meeting. Decolonization has always been, from the beginning, something that we have been aiming towards and focusing on, because the thing is that currently the way that we do energy in this country is a fundamentally colonial form of power. And we need to move to a system that puts both power back into our hands as citizens and also allows us to be self-sustaining and responsible so that we can generate the power that we need without hurting the rest of the world. So our main problem here is that DTE is not transitioning fast enough to meet global or local emissions targets. They currently have about 60% of their power being generated by coal, and about 20% of it by fracked gas. Only about 7% of that is coming from wind and solar. And that is just not acceptable. And the thing is that DTE's current target date is 2050 to reach carbon neutrality. And Arbor has, as we all know, has a carbon neutrality date of 2030. President Joe Biden has set a carbon free electricity date of 2035. So that brings us to what we feel is the solution to this problem: municipalization. So what is municipalization? In short, it would mean taking our power system away from this privately owned, investor-owned utility model and into a city-owned public power utility. Now, public utilities are a very common thing across the United States. Most people get their water and sewer from it. However, public power utilities actually are a very common way of getting power, and historically were a very common way of getting power until a lot of them were removed in the 20th century. But currently, there are more than 2,000 communities across the United States that get their power from a municipal energy utility. And over 40 of those municipalities are in Michigan alone. And that's not there's no secret as to why that is. Michigan explicitly protects the city's right to form a municipal energy utility. It is protected by both the state constitution and by the Ann Arbor City Charter. And so why do we believe that a municipal energy utility would be the right option for Ann Arbor? Well, it's reliable, it's affordable, it puts power back into our hands, and it invests in our community. And speaking to what we're talking about today, it is an environmentally responsible route forward. So let's talk about reliability. On average, public power utilities lose power just about half as often as the private power utility counterparts. However, if you're looking at the nationwide data, it actually kind of obscures the case in Michigan, which is that DTE back in 2017, where we pulled this data, lost power for over 1,000 minutes on average. However, the city of Lansing, the largest municipal energy utility in the state of Michigan, lost power for over 250 minutes. That's a quarter, that is only a quarter of the downtime that the private power utility counterpart achieved. And not only that, it's cheaper. Public power utilities on average pay about 14% less than a private power utility counterpart. But again, the nationwide data kind of obscures the case here at home. Ann Arbor currently pays about 17.51 cents per kilowatt hour to DTE for its energy. Meanwhile, Chelsea, our next door neighbor, pays only 10.15 cents per kilowatt hour with the municipal energy utility. But we don't just believe that we should do this because it's cheaper, better power, though honestly, that's probably enough of a reason. We believe that it is important that we take a direct voice in our energy decision making. With a municipal energy utility, we would control the rates, we would control the source of power, and we would control when infrastructure is updated. And furthermore, invest in our community. Now, I can get into the details about how municipal energy utilities tend to pay back more to their communities through pilot than the investor-owned utilities tend to pay through in taxes. But another thing I want to talk about is the fact that we are moving forward with our technology. We are moving towards the future is almost certainly going to be with distributed energy and renewable power sources. However, the reality is that currently that field is primarily non-union. And that is a lot of what Debbie Dingle was talking about earlier today, where it is giving people a lot of anxiety about where their job is going to go. And if we do make the switch, are they going to be paid considerably less in considerably worse situations? If we had a municipal energy utility, we could manage that just transition. We could ensure that we are providing good union jobs, fair, responsible contracting to make sure that we bring unions with us into the future. Furthermore, it would allow us to create reliable infrastructure and a far more resilient energy grid than we currently have now. But getting to the main topic of the day, it is environmentally responsible. It is our path to 100% renewable energy, and we can do it on our own terms. We can both mandate that the city only construct renewable energy generation sources, but also a municipal energy utility has the ability to purchase energy from the grid. And we could be selective with how we purchase that energy to ensure that we're only buying from renewable energy sources. And furthermore, one of the big hurdles for distributed energy generation and renewable energy generation in the state are the caps that are put on our amount of rooftop solar that we can generate. DTE could waive these caps. Consumer has increased the cap up to 2%. DTE has left it at 1%. A municipal energy utility would have full control over that cap and could raise it to 100%. And they would have an incentive to do so because they would not be a for-profit entity. Instead, they would be an entity simply designed to ensure that we have safe, reliable, environmentally responsible power. And this is not just a fairy tale. Municipalization has happened across the country successfully many times. In 1998, Long Island municipalized their energy utility, and they now serve well over 1 million customers and managed to reduce their electricity rates by an average of 20%. Winter Park, Florida, municipalized their energy utility back in 2005, and the city made so much money from that energy utility that they were able to invest in their infrastructure, create underground lines that massively reduced the outages that they were facing. And finally, and I think in a lot of ways most inspiringly, Jefferson County, Washington voted in 2008 to establish the municipal energy utility. They bought out their local energy utility, Puget Sound, for a $103 million buyout. And now they have a 97% carbon-free electricity mix, one of the cleanest mixes in the entire country. Hopefully soon to be beaten by us in Ann Arbor here at 100%. So thank you. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you for your time. You can find us at AnnArborPublicPower.com. You can follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. You can sign up for our email list. We just put out a newsletter where we're both talking about what we're doing as an organization and the local energy issues that are going on around the state and the country. So I really appreciate all of your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. Now we turn to Luke Dillingham from the Climate Action Movement. So Luke, you're next.
Hi everyone, I'm Luke. I'm going to quick share my screen. So I'm from the Climate Action Movement at the University of Michigan, and our goal for our org and just in general is a just transition to true carbon neutrality by 2030. Just implies environmental justice, so we're getting into that. And then also true carbon neutrality is important because a lot of institutions will focus on the use of carbon offsets, which essentially just pass on the responsibility. And there is some discussion that is nuanced about the use of offsets that is a course of discussion that could go on for hours. But a lot of carbon offsets are used by institutions to just avoid making any real changes. So that's why those are important. We're a group of students, staff, and faculty members at the University of Michigan and community members in Washtenaw County focused on fighting climate injustice. Mainly, I'm going to talk about why we focus on the university. And that's because it's really a center of power and it holds a lot of privilege. So one of our big campaigns in the past was focusing on its $12.5 billion endowment. And so that's just like so demonstrable to people just in the amount of power that this institution holds. But we focus on believing that everyone has access to natural resources and a livable planet. And so we commit to a sort of different structure than a lot of organizations, and it's like a radical relation-based organizing, which is non-hierarchical. So all of our members have essentially access to the same power no matter how long you've been there, which is a little different But we think it really is useful in that it really works on having a distributed amount of people power. And then we also want to build coalitions. As Greg mentioned, we're part of the coalition for A2P2, and we also believe in a diversity of tactics. So that includes working with groups such as the Washtenaw Dems and labor unions. So in the past, we've done organizing with GEO, which is the Graduate Employment Organization, which is the union for graduate students at the University of Michigan, and LEO, which is the lecturers union. And so we believe that using a diversity of tactics, which is sometimes we're being more radical and then working with groups that are a little more mainstream, working within institutions, and we're working outside, tends to produce the best results when you have these mixes of direct action and working within institutions. So currently we're working on 3 campaigns, which are housing justice, DTE and public power, which I'll note a little bit on, but Greg covered much more in depth than I will. And then also the University of Michigan Endowment Justice and community reinvestment. So starting with housing justice, housing is a huge environmental justice issue, and especially in Ann Arbor, where housing is increasingly expensive. The university and just Ann Arbor in general have contributed to huge amounts of gentrification. I live in Carytown in Ann Arbor, which is historically a Black neighborhood that people have been pushed out of because of increasing housing prices. So that's a racial and economic issue. But then there's also issues of sustainability, where if people are having to commute in, then this is a huge amount of waste. And it also prevents solutions such as improved public transit. And so these are issues that are a combination of racial and economic justice and environmental justice. And then so part of this work involves coalition building. I had mentioned that we have done work with GEO in the past. And so this involves talking to stakeholders at the city and also potentially with the university, because one of the contributing factors to Ann Arbor's high prices for housing is that the University of Michigan continues to admit larger and larger classes of students. In this case, actually, it is a bit of simple supply and demand. If you keep increasing the demand base, then the prices just continue to increase and push out especially vulnerable people in Ann Arbor. So here are just a few points. I'm gonna go pretty quickly through this because Greg covered this pretty well. So DTE is one of the dirtiest energy mixes in the country. As Greg covered, public power gives us an opportunity to move potentially to 100% renewables rather than having DTE, which is just very heavily invested into fossil fuels. They have successfully, in some cases, lobbied to hamstring community solar at the state level. And then they're also increasing their fracking, which I had mentioned with them being a dirty energy provider. And we sort of need to be going in the opposite direction. They're making these long-term investments in fossil fuels because they have a profit motive to do it right now. But that does not align with the motives that we have for protecting our community. And then DTE also increases their costs at around 2 times the national average. So not only is public power better for all of these environmental reasons, but as Greg mentioned, it also has the potential to be cheaper. And then, so our last campaign that we're working on currently is Endowment Justice. I mentioned earlier that the University of Michigan has a $12.5 billion endowment. We were recently engaged and successful in a campaign over many years that involved divesting over $1 billion of the university endowment from fossil fuels. And our follow-up is that there are still issues with the university investments in this power structure that's largely undemocratic. Currently, one of the things we're working on is creating some form of institutional oversight that is a committee that is specifically focused on the ethics of its investments. These institutional oversight committees are really common in other peer universities. For example, Columbia has one, UCLA, and pretty much all the universities in the UC system have them as well. So this is not some novel idea that we should incorporate more than just a profit incentive into these investment decisions. And one just quick example that is a large environmental justice issue is the University of Michigan has millions of dollars invested in these palm oil plantations in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which involve huge human rights violations. People have their land stolen. There are potential issues of essentially slave labor, where people are working on these palm oil plantations and then never receive any form of compensation. And the people whose land is stolen are often Indigenous people who are the most vulnerable and have the least amount of power and any recourse under the law. So this is just one example of these types of investments that would be prevented by some form of oversight committee. And then the other end of this is community reinvestment, which is using the institutional power of the university to invest and build community resilience. And that involves investments into things such as affordable housing and into worker-owned businesses, cooperatives, stuff of the like, that build up resilience and in terms of economic and social justice, and also prepare us for potential environmental disasters coming in the wake of climate change. So that's our current campaigns. I'm gonna stop right here and we'll make room for questions.
Well, thank you very much, Luke. Very interesting organization that you have, that you are spokesperson for. And now we'll turn to the spokespeople for Sunrise, Navdeep Kaur and Ben Vercellino. And they have 8 minutes between them. So we'll let them figure out how to do that.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ben, and I use he, him pronouns, and I'm part of Sunrise and Arbor. The reason why I got into the climate justice movement is because in my hometown, I've seen firsthand the consequences of the climate crisis. I've seen massive flooding that just brings complete and utter destruction to my community, as well as the compounded factor of the privatization and deregulation of our infrastructure, and how, because of that, the damages and the consequences of the climate crisis fall on to the most marginalized members of our community. And I'll pass it on to Nav.
Hi, thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. My name is Nav. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm fighting for environmental justice because I think it's unfair that billionaires can continue to line their pockets at the expense of our futures, our well-beings, and the well-being of our planet, especially the well-being of minority populations such as Black, Indigenous, people of color, low-income communities, because as we know, and as everyone already said, that those minority populations will be and already are suffering from the climate change crisis the most, and they will continue to do so as well. So because not only mine and Ben's desire for a better world where everyone has access to clean air, clean water, a good green job, regardless of their zip code, but also in addition, the desire of thousands of other young people that we've joined together at Sunrise to fight for a better world. And we're doing so by building the People's Alignment, which is a group of citizens and organizations united in our shared vision that the government should fight for the dignity and justice of all. And we're a cross-class, multiracial movement rooted in collective liberation of all people and equity. And we know that we're stronger when we stand together. And we're not looking to the left or to the right, we look forward. And together we will change the country and the world, sure as the sun rises each morning. I love that line. Yeah. And so we unite to make climate change an urgent priority for all Americans and across America. And we try to end the corrupting influence of billionaires on our politics and elect officials who stand up for the health and well-being of all people. And we've done this both on a national and local level. So on a local level, we endorsed, this past election cycle, we endorsed a lot of people, including Eli Savitt for Washington County Prosecutor, Crystal Dupree, and Ernesto Guerrero for Ann Arbor Public School Board. And they were all successfully elected, which was great. And we endorsed these candidates because we believe they embody the principles we hold dear to Sunrise, and that relate not only to the climate crisis, but also to justice, equity, and anti-oppression. Like, for example, Eli Savitt ran a campaign on rehabilitation over incarceration, eliminating inequity, and ending cash bail. And since day one, he's been supporting those principles. And we also support GEO. And I think someone mentioned that that's the graduate student union here at EMISH, because we understand that everyone, again, deserves a good job. And additionally, we are working together with Representative Dingell on the Thrive Agenda, which Ben will talk a little bit more about soon. And we've also endorsed the A20 plan, which I think has been mentioned as well, that's been working towards carbon neutrality by 2030. And we've also we also do a lot of trainings. Like this past March, we put on a 3-part training series about the Green New Deal. So introducing new people to what the Green New Deal is, how we're gonna get it under Biden, how to talk to your community about the Green New Deal. And we got over 60 new people, which was wonderful. And in addition, we also did trainings like the collective liberation training we had this past year. And that was centered on, again, JO principles, so justice, equity, and anti-oppression principles, because we understand that environmental justice is also racial and economic justice. And nationally, Sunrise has played a central role in Biden's climate policy. And so we helped establish a White House Office of Domestic Climate Policy and National Climate Task Force. And we're making sure that he keeps up with that promise. And so just yesterday, there was a national action in DC to keep Biden accountable on his promise for climate policy. And again, making sure that he gets what he promised, get it done. And now I'm going to pass off to Ben to talk a little bit more about what we're doing now.
Yes, awesome. So what are we working on right now? Both nationally and locally, Sunrise has launched our Good Jobs for All campaign. Now, with the Good Jobs for All campaign, we have these instrumental demands listed below. We want to invest $10 trillion to create at least 15 million good jobs. We want to fund a civilian climate corps and public health jobs. We want to pass the Protect the Right to Organize Act and have 50% of funds going to communities on the front lines and moving every sector of our economy to 100% renewable energy. And we'd also like to pass the Thrive Agenda. Now, the reason why I love this campaign, specifically of Good Jobs for All, is because oftentimes the Green New Deal can be stereotyped as just this radical idea that lives on college campuses, but isn't very realistic. But what is realistic is good jobs for all. Every American stands to benefit from good jobs and everything that comes with it. You know, we benefit from having a civilian climate corps. We benefit from being able to pass the PRO Act and having our right to organize. We're better off when we are unionized, and especially when our frontline communities and those that are most disenfranchised have the funding and the representation that they need. And so with the Good Jobs for All campaign, we're able to take the Green New Deal campaign that is often stigmatized and really connect it with every American and how it impacts all of us. Now, to dive a little deeper into the Thrive Agenda, I'm not going to have time to talk about it all, but as stated before, we're super happy to have Representative Dingell being co-sponsoring the Thrive Agenda, but there's really 2 pillars that I am most excited about, and that is investing in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and strengthening and healing the nation-to-nation relationships of our sovereign Native nations. Now, why these are so important is because oftentimes in environmental work, the solutions can crowd out and leave out the voices of our most disenfranchised communities of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. But through the language of the Thrive Agenda and the work that we are doing on the Good Jobs for All campaign, we are trying to center those voices and intertwine the language of those most impacted, and so that we can create a comprehensive solution to both like the environmental crisis, but also the crises that we're seeing that are impacting these communities, and so that we're able to build that just, sustainable, and equitable future. Now, the date hasn't been finalized, but we are going to be launching a teach-in series in the coming months to learn more about the Thrive Agenda and the Good Jobs for All campaign. And we would love to see you all there. We will be passing along the details as soon as they are available to us. And yeah, we're super excited, and we would love to work with any of you. If you have any questions about what Sunrise is doing or how you could get involved, you can send an email to Nav or I. She'll be dropping those in the chat. And if you'd like to check more about the Thrive Agenda, you can check it out on the website that Nav is dropping as well. And with that, that concludes our presentation.
Oh.
And I will pass it back off to Kathleen.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. That was an inspirational, those were all inspirational presentations. And now we'd like to, just a second here. And now we'd like to go to put us all on the screen. I don't know if we can do this, Satish. So we're in basically gallery view. And I'll do that for me anyway. And so we'll ask some questions. And what I'm going to do first is ask one question to all of you. Some of you actually have sort of answered this in a way, and ask you to give 1 minute response to it. So we'll go in the order that you spoke. So if you could ask our listeners here today to do something to help your cause, what would it be? How would you like people to engage in a positive way in the work you're doing? In other words, how can we help grow the climate crisis and environmental justice movement from your perspective? So, Michelle.
Join the council, that's my first answer. But truly, you know, I think Missy and others said it, we are at a historic moment. And what we do now matters so much on environmental justice and climate. So yes, join the council, but find your niche, whether it's with one of the other organizations or in some other way. Fighting for the PRO Act is also fighting for climate justice. So that's what I ask, is that everyone do what they can. That may be 5 minutes of social media or maybe many hours.
Thank you. Yousef, Rabhi.
Yeah, thank you. So I think for me, it's going back to what I was saying earlier. I'm really fired up about this morning. Learn your history. You know, you may think that you know how things went down. You don't. Go back and understand more, read, try to challenge yourself. If there's a book I can recommend, it's Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. Read that, understand it. You will understand colonialism. You will help to understand, you know, the roots of resistance and why that's important. Our history is our present. So really dig in and try to understand that so that you can understand the present. And once you understand the present, we need you to stay involved and engaged. We need you to contact your state representatives, but more important, and your state senators and your congresspeople, but more importantly, engage with your friends and your relatives who live in other parts of the state, who maybe don't, you know, live in a more liberal, open-minded community, but that live in other parts of the state. You know, engage with them, help them understand what you're thinking, and encourage them to contact their representatives and senators as well to expand the reach of your activism.
Thank you, Yousef. So Nayyirah, Shariff.
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of things happening on the waterfront, but I would say like one of the most emerging things that's happening right now is we have municipalities around the state that are instituting water shutoffs. So last year we were successful in getting a moratorium for water shutoffs and mandating reconnections because of the pandemic. Unfortunately, that expired March 31st of this year. And so now we have communities that are doing water shutoffs. We have the city of Saginaw, like they're starting water shutoffs June 15th. Muskegon has already done it. the city of East Lansing, where 1 in 9 households are in arrears, they decided to do a moratorium on water shutoffs. Hazel Park and Oak Park and Metro Detroit is doing it, and we're just tracking that. So I would say as we are getting, funds coming or help is on the way as far as like water affordability with the low income household water affordability, a water assistance plan that will be launching in the state of Michigan in the next few months. Like you really need to like make sure that, like your community is not instituting water shutoffs. I used to come from a union household and we're like everybody in, nobody out. And so we have to make sure all of our communities have access to running water still. And then we're still in a global pandemic.
Thank you, Nayyirah. So Dr. Stults.
I think everything that's been said is a great addition. I'll just add a really simple one of just talk to someone about these issues. I think we often look for really big, grandiose solutions, and you are trusted for the people in your life, and you talking about these issues can help demystify it and make it a little bit more accessible. And it can be scary to talk about them, but practice and start talking about them. And then when you're ready, sign up to become an ambassador and get all of the tools that you need to go out and champion this work widely.
Thank you, Dr. Stults. Greg.
Yeah, no, we definitely have an uphill battle here. We're going to be taking on DTE. There's going to be a lot of money thrown at us. So what we really need is people to engage and volunteer. A great way to get involved and find out how to do that is to sign up for our email list. You can do that at AnnArborPublicPower.com. We are going to be hopefully pushing to get this on the ballot in 2022. And so, it's gonna be a hard campaign, and we could use all the support that we can get. Especially if you live in Ann Arbor, if you could talk to your city council members about why you think that public power is important and why you think that this is a good idea. Having support within the city is really necessary to make this happen. So that's what I would say. And thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Luke.
I think the general thing is just show up. It's like really easy to know about a lot of these things, but then not do anything. And honestly, it's better if you just show up, even if you don't know anything. So that's show up to protests or direct actions, go to a meeting of some of these orgs if you're interested in them. Just anything small like that, and just show up, learn, and care. And I don't think people can ask much more after that.
Okay, thank you. Nav.
I can answer this question first.
Sorry, Ben.
As highlighted by this panel, is that there's just like a plethora of opportunities that if you want to get involved in this work, you definitely can. Our Good Jobs for All campaign will have a lot of public engagement coming in a month. We don't really have a lot of details that we can give you now, but we definitely want you to get involved and join any of these amazing organizations represented here. Join our Sunrise Hub. If you don't live in the area, you can check out and find a local hub at the Sunrise website. I can personally attest, I love our hub. It's awesome. They do a lot of amazing work. And also I would say that listen to the marginalized members of your community, making sure that you're amplifying their voices as well, and making sure that everyone is being heard.
Thank you all. And now we'll turn to questions from our attendees out there in Zoom land. I'd like to ask, if you'd like to ask a question, click the raised hand icon at the bottom of your screen. And we'll take questions more or less in the order that we received them. When you are called on, your microphone and video will be turned on so you can ask a question. We'd like you to then say your name and be succinct. If you addressed a panelist, one person, then I'll ask other panelists if they'd like to respond also. And if it's a general question for all, I'll ask each to raise their hand on the screen like so I can call on you to answer that. So could we have our first person?
We have Desiree Simmons. She is promoted to panelist.
Okay, Desiree.
Hi, good, I don't know, it's afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. I'm sorry I missed some of the earlier presentations, but I was happy to see the variety of the panel and that this is something that we're focusing on as a party here. One question I have, and again, I'm sorry if this was already talked about earlier, but I know that something that we've talked a lot about as part of Magic is false solutions and how we could be pushing, and some folks within the Democratic Party could be pushing solutions that actually set us back in the larger picture, or that, hurts frontline communities early on. And so I'm just wondering from the panelists in terms of thinking about how you would push back against false solutions, or if you are promoting any false solutions, like how you would listen to communities that say that we need something different.
So would anybody like to take that on? Would you raise your hand and I'll. Nobody? Well, it looks like people think that has been answered.
Greg has his hand up.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. So thank you, Desiree. I think that that's very true. And I think that it is a, there is a lot of people out. So one thing I've realized in doing this work, and I didn't quite realize it when I started, was that there is definitely the huge issue of the people out there in society that are standing against any movement towards addressing climate change. There are people who oppose it wholeheartedly, and everybody knows that. But there is also this other thread that is very dangerous and very unknown, of people who do accept the future is going to have to be green, that we are going to have to make this change, but they're looking for ways that they can capitalize on that transition. They're looking for ways that they can ensure that the world is better for them and worse for people in that transition. And I think that we have to be really diligent to ensure that our solutions create a more equitable and just world in that transition. And, for me, I believe that public power is how we address that, how we ensure that in this transition, we move towards a more just and equitable society. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. That's just a perspective I've gained in going down this path.
Missy.
I think I'm after. Right, you're up first. Your hand was up before me. You should go.
Like put it
Oh,
down.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
But yeah, we didn't really like go into like false solutions, like how I define false solutions, like nuclear power, or like talking about the difference between clean energy and nuclear energy and like how that's defined, or like how biomass, because like for me, like we can't have climate justice that continues the practice of Black and brown death, because like right now we have, under the fossil fuel extractive economy, we have sacrifice zones where we have Black and brown communities that are dying. And like that's the true cost of those industries, is you have people who are in close proximity of those facilities dying, dying a slow death of asthma. And like as we're talking about, like like Tulsa massacres piercing the national consciousness, like we have dispossession happening right now and death happening right now, but it's a slow lingering death from illnesses and cancer and all of these things, and asthma, and just your dreams being derailed through like these extractive economies. And we have to make sure that like whatever this just transition we talk about, like the society we want to live in, like doesn't create sacrifice zones. Like we can't have that anymore. If we're valuing human life, like we can't like create spaces that like it's okay, or we're having like carbon markets or carbon taxing or all these other things that is going to have Black and brown death.
Thank you. So, Missy.
Yeah, just quickly, I struggled on this one because I was thinking about the scale of the false solution. And so I'm going to cut this really quickly from two scales. One is we've never done this before. And so we are going to come up both with false solutions that we think like really, really actually think are solutions. And that's a different problem than those who are capitalizing, I think, in what Greg was talking about, kind of like exploitive. And so acknowledging like we're making this up, and we need to name the false solutions that we see and understand those different dynamics. One false solution that drives me bonkers is the individualization of this work. We like to blame the individual. It's your fault then that you're not making the right choice. And it's your fault, Kathleen. If only you recycled more, if only you turn off your lights more. Good Lord, we could all go carbon neutral tomorrow and we didn't change the paradigm, right? Like it's not us that's broken. Well, we're a little bit broken, but the system is pretty broken around us. And so I get really frustrated when people turn this around and say, it's not for a local government to do, it's for the federal government to do, or it's not for me as a corporation, it's for you as a consumer. And that just, that doesn't carry water for me.
Great. Okay, we'll have a next question, Satish.
We have Rita Mitchell. Change to the panelists. Go ahead, Rita. You should be able to speak in. Turn on the video.
Hello. Hi. I actually have two questions, if you don't mind. There's a question about how much carbon emissions have decreased this year. And actually, this is for you, Missy, as a result of, oh, no, I'm sorry. This is a different one. Sorry. I'm just going to ask on offsets. This is to something that wasn't discussed by the group, but offsets have often been discussed in addressing the carbon neutrality approaches to life. And my question is, how do we know that offset purchases are not creating another kind of colonial problem that's outside of our immediate view?
Okay, Yousef.
Yeah, that's a great question, Rita. I think carbon offsets is actually a false solution, and one that is not all that helpful. It's a short-term, potentially a short-term solution, but is not the direction we should be going. And that's why when I introduced my 100% renewable energy bill, it amends the Renewable Energy Portfolio Act of the state of Michigan that actually forces our utilities to build renewable energy infrastructure instead of being able to rely on offsets. If you look at DTE's plan, I know that I think it was Commissioner Morgan that mentioned, DTE has this goal of 2050 and Washtenaw County wants to do it sooner. But if you look at DTE's goal of 2050, it's 2050 with carbon offsets. It's 2050 with nuclear power. It's 2050 with all these options that they're saying that they're going to be carbon neutral. I don't think the goal really should be carbon neutrality. I think the goal should be moving towards renewable power and publicly owned power, as was talked about earlier. So I agree with you that it is that it isn't ideal, and that's why when I introduced my bill, it really focused on moving our utilities to be 100% renewable under our state law.
Okay, Luke.
Yeah, getting into offsets, offsets in itself, you can't really blanket them because there's a lot of, again, we can get into hours-long discussion about what a good offset is and not, but generally speaking, it's very difficult to track how much you're actually offsetting with these programs. A lot of them are not permanent, which is another issue. And then, like we mentioned, that it is sort of a false solution. There are now starting up in these sort of commodities exchange markets to have markets for offsets and derivatives thereof. And this is another thing that we're just getting into, people profiting off of the climate crisis, in that there are these large firms that are just making these wacky offset derivative investments just for a bunch of these non-permanent offsets. And so I don't really view solutions for carbon neutrality that include offsets as a true solution unless you can really do the work and prove that it will actually take place. Because if not, you're just sort of putting the blame and pushing it off to someone else so that you can pretend like you're carbon neutral without actually addressing your core behavior.
So, thank you, Michelle.
That was very wise, and it was a lot of what I was going to say. So I will ride the coattails to that wisdom, but I do want to underscore that, you know, offsets and some of the other things that we think of when we think of false solutions, they can be greenwashing and they can be kicking the can down the road. And what was just said was really true. A lot of the science around figuring out what the actual emissions are, especially around like agriculture, they're at best estimates. And I mean, and the soil scientists will tell you that. And so when I hear that people think we're gonna, you know, plant our way out of the climate crisis, tree planting or changing soil practices, and I go and I look at the current science, I say, I don't know. And if you're gonna plant that many trees, you're gonna be cutting down trees in the globe. I mean, you're gonna be doing it on farmland in the global south. So that goes back to the point many people have made and that Desiree raised, which is that, you know, all of these initiatives, all of these ideas, and there are gonna be lots of them, you know, and new ones we haven't even thought of yet. And we need new and innovative ideas, but we have to look at them holistically, and we have to incorporate environmental justice framework and equity considerations into every single decision that we make. It can't be incidental. And we have to have the people whose lives are most impacted and who've borne and will bear the brunt of climate change involved in making those decisions.
Thank you, Michelle. Yousef, do you have your hand up again, or?
I do, yeah. I just wanted to
Okay.
say one other thing about the tree planting issue and about carbon offsets and about some of the other things that were mentioned, which is that I believe that if an activity is addressing a core behavior, then it can be considered in the context of a carbon plan. So for example, I've approached the University of Michigan, multiple regions and administrative staff about the University of Michigan's portfolio of healthy native ecosystems that it manages. And unfortunately, we saw within the last 5 years, the university sold a massive property in Ann Arbor Township to a developer who came in and destroyed half of the site to build a corporate headquarters. And those are trees, ecosystems, plants lost. And that has an impact on our carbon footprint as a University of Michigan. And so I do think that things like that do need to be considered when the university sells native healthy ecosystems for development. That is a cost to its carbon total. And if University of Michigan is willing to step up and actually protect some of its native ecosystems on North Campus in Ann Arbor Township, that is willing to preserve those, I think that should count towards a benefit, because there's an actual calculated amount of carbon that those properties sequester every day. And if they decide to develop those, we lose that carbon sequestration resource right here in Ann Arbor, right here in our own community. We can't do that. So in those specific cases, if they address core behaviors of an institution, I do think that those should be considered in the context of carbon plans.
Okay, Luke, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just quick jumping on that university. This is what I've been spending most of my time thinking about. They also don't really include their investments into their carbon neutrality calculations. So they're not invested in Exxon, but per se, like if you have $1 billion invested in ExxonMobil, you are responsible for a portion of the emissions created by that company. So you have to calculate what you're bankrolling into your carbon neutrality plans. And currently that isn't being done. And I think that's sort of where we're getting into some amounts of institutional oversight and changing these core behaviors, in that it allows you to put a cost on what more than just profit on your investments. Because at the end of the day, what good is, an extra 5% profit if, the world's on fire?
Thank you. Michelle, you already spoke, right? Your hand's still up.
Quick addendum to what Yousef said, because as someone who's planted 10 acres of land farm to a native prairie and native trees, I am absolutely supportive of the idea of doing that, in part because we need to support biodiversity, which is challenged by climate change, and we do want to incentivize different kinds of development. But it's just, there are, Republican Trump was the one who proposed that, we're going to plant trees and that's how we're going to solve this. And I just think we have to approach those proposals with extreme caution. I guess I'll put it that way.
Thank you. So we'll take another question. Satish?
We have one more hand raised. The name is not visible. alsorag@comcast.net. So I'm going to promote you to panelists, and you're welcome to turn on your camera, and you should be able to speak now. Are you able to turn on your camera? Microphone?
There,
Should be able to.
just came
There
up.
you go.
Okay, there we go. Hi, everyone. This is a big mouthful of a question, and you've addressed it somewhat. And this is a question from Washington 350. But what are some specific plans and specific obstacles to implement the necessary transitions at speed, at scale, at every level, from rooftop to business, transportation, ATA, AAPS, U of M, city, county, state, and federal, in a climate emergency? And what I'm thinking about are all the existing laws, rules, and even just practices that make it very difficult to implement changes, let alone the financing and the vision of where we do need to go, and avoiding the false solutions that I'm so pleased that you've already mentioned most of my favorite false solutions. The only one you didn't mention was carbon capture and storage, which is another nasty one. So just like to hear some ideas of what specifically we need to be focusing on to get where we need to go. Thank you.
Anybody willing to take that one on? Missy?
Yeah, I'll take that from a really specific vantage that I know Lauren knows about too, forgive me, is if we think about electrification, right? So as we're transitioning off of gas and we're making a transition over to electric, let's start with a regulatory environment. We have a hostile state government that is not interested in doing this. They're actually looking to prevent us from even incentivizing the transition over. It's very delightful to work in this space. Let's go to the contractors. You want to do a heat pump? Most of the time right now, when you call someone out to replace a furnace, they're going to do a like for a like. Getting to a heat pump is like pushing a boulder up a hill, trying to get someone that's knowledgeable enough about the technology up front to support you. Best case, they're going to give you a backup furnace, the natural gas system kind of tied to it. But we know that you can get a cold weather furnace that will perform in our climate. Can't get it. Then you're fuel switching, because you're switching from natural gas to electric. There's no incentive, even though you're at a greater efficiency. So now you're not getting the rebates. You have a delta upfront cost to make that change. But if you were going from natural gas, not performing to a better performing natural gas, you get a rebate. You've got an operational upfront cost difference. Now you've got an operational cost because we pay the highest electric rate. Now you've transitioned over. You probably don't have an efficient house, so now you need to do efficiency. I can keep going. The whole point is that it's not one point of intervention in our market. The things that are one point of intervention we're doing, right? Because that's where we're seeing movement. The point is we have to change the whole market. We have to change the manufacturers. We've got to change the policy landscape. We've got to change the contractors. We've got to change the education that people have. The way you experience comfort is different with a heat pump. It's actually more stable than what we're used to, let like gush of hot air or cool air flowing out of that vent. And so that's just it's a wicked, what we call a wicked problem. And that's one of the things that we're working on multiple different scales, but it's just not fast. It's not fast enough. And we know that's true. Just wanted to share that one.
Michelle?
Thought someone was before me, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not seeing anyone else.
Nayyirah.
Yeah, let her. Nayyirah.
No, okay. Go ahead,
Michelle
Michelle.
was first.
Nayyirah?
Okay.
Go
I
ahead.
just want to just talk very briefly of responding to a climate disaster and using the Flint water crisis as a framework. Be clear and perfectly honest, when you're designing these practices, that you do it is designed with equity and everybody in, nobody out, because initially when the state of Michigan activated the National Guard to have water distribution sites, they required people to show a photo ID to receive the water. And in Michigan, if you're undocumented, you can't get a state issued photo ID, so they could not receive that. Also in Michigan, if you're trans, you have to have the name that's on your birth certificate, so people's dead name is on their photo ID. And so you had basically these practices for trauma. And then when the state of Michigan also expanded the Medicaid for children under the age of 21, so they can receive healthcare, and pregnant women, undocumented people are ineligible for most of the social safety net. And if you're documented, you have to be here for 5 years before you could even begin to access that stuff. So even with the recovery, you still had populations who were already marginalized and did not have access to information, and they were out. So they were kind of shut out of the recovery process. And I would say you have to have specific interventions. And also, we in Flint, we have the state Michigan School of the Deaf that's here. And so there was no language, there was nothing in American Sign Language to educate the deaf community. So you have to have very intentional interventions, because our policies are geared towards inequity. And so you have to have specific interventions to make equity in these policies.
Okay. Michelle, were you next?
Yeah, I think so.
We're going to have to, I was going to say though, we're going to have to be brief because we're running out of time here. So
just building off of what Nayyirah was saying, and Missy, the system works in the sense of perpetuating inequity. And that is also, it also favors corporations. And so my own experience as a farmer trying to access conservation programs on our relatively small farm, 80 acres, it can be very difficult. So the county has a wonderful program called Barrier Busters for accessing social services and one-stop shops for people to access all of the things that could be useful to them in helping to fight the climate crisis. Environmental injustice, I think, is a really important thing that government at all levels could do, whether it's accessing motherization or whatever. But just at the federal level, very quickly, because time's running out, I'm just going to name some things that are barriers, going back to Lauren's question. FERC, which regulates pipelines, the Senate and the filibuster issue, voter suppression efforts by Republicans happening at the state level and at the federal level. Please support HR 1 for the People Act to reform the way voting happens, and campaign finance, all those things. That's all. Hope that was quick.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, I'll be quick. I just want to say that currently in our backyard, the #1 bad actor on the climate is DTE. They have just expanded their frack gas. They built $1 billion fracked gas plant and have plans to build at least one more. And no amount of offsets or is going to change that fact. They have no plans to retire these plants. We have to be able to name the enemy. And for us locally, that enemy is DTE, and we need to be willing to take them on directly.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of our time here. We have to transition to the announcements, but first I'd just like to say thank you to all of our guests here today on the panel and to those people who've asked questions. I think, however, for all of us here who care so deeply about the life of all things and the health of our planet, who know that there is no planet B, as Mrs. Stein said, we salute you for your commitments, your actions, and your leadership in facing down these life-threatening crises that challenge us all. So thank you very much.